Welcome to Focus Today, and delighted to have back in the studio, as always, Mr. Patrick Doyle. Him. He heads up Veritas Counseling, and today we're taking on really a topic that has so many avenues to it. Patrick, I'm not even sure if we can cover it all today, but we're going to deal with trauma and being traumatized or a traumatic experience. The first question I have is, do a lot of people's emotional issues stem from the fact that they've been traumatized and perhaps they don't even connect the dots between that trauma and their current emotional state? That this thing that God gives us calling bury it, I guess. I don't know if that's a gift of God, but we have a way of humans to take the bad things and get rid of them.
Well,
or at least departmentalize them.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you're absolutely right, Perry, in that when you're traumatized, for example, I'll use myself as an example. So when I'm getting in a situation where my dad's beating me, now that's emotionally overwhelming. I can't really handle the reality of that. So what happens is something we in treatment and counseling we call disassociation. So while the event is happening, I sort of check out. I'm physically present, but sometimes I can't even remember what happened.
Let me stop you on that point. Isn't that God-given?
It is. It's His mercy to keep us from being crushed by the event. So the problem is that disassociation is very helpful to survive the traumatic event. But years later, when I'm not in the traumatic event, I don't need to utilize that skill. But when we utilize that skill later, what happens is we continue to allow those events that happen to us, they have life, they live. So you're right, people many times don't have any connection between the behavior they have today, which concerns them and they don't really understand at times, and the behavior and the experiences that they had at an earlier point in their life.
All right, because recently we've seen some things in the news that were horrific. I'm thinking of 3 gals that were captured for 10 years. And they obviously traumatized to where they didn't have the wherewithal to make a break until it happened. Just most recently, the gal that was kidnapped in Idaho, and her abductor was killed. I mean, so what happens to the person during the actual trauma that allows them to just kind of, I don't know, it seems like their basic instincts from survival just gets pushed on pause or something.
Well, there's lots of things that can happen in that circumstance where well, first of all, I've never met an abuser who is who's not unwilling to use threats or fear. I've never really talked to somebody who's been abused either in a family situation or in a situation like you're talking about, where the abuser or the person involved didn't use threats as a way to control the person. Every person just about that I've ever dealt with who has had trauma, the abuser threatens them.
I was thinking of the sex trafficking issue.
Exactly. There's another great example. Most of those girls are scared to do anything because of the threats that have been given to them. And a lot of abusers will do things that will back the threats up. They won't go all the way, but they'll do things to make the person know they're serious. So you got to understand that that's a very difficult reality to be in. So think about being mistreated and being fearful and being stuck and being that way over a period of years.
I can't.
And then think about it being somebody within your own family who's doing the harm. Somebody like your father or your mother or your brother or your sister or your aunt or your uncle or your grandfather. So many of the situations I deal with, it's familial abuse. It's somebody who is in the family who's abusing the girl or the boy, either physically or sexually or verbally. And here's the other thing. Somebody who's traumatized, the trauma is in the eyes of the person who's experiencing it.
Right.
And I think a lot of times what we do is we sort of put like well, that shouldn't bother you.
Okay, but let me ask you this. You were traumatized as a child.
Yes.
Forgive me if I'm getting into
No, that's fine. Okay. I'm glad to share the story.
Okay. Now, it appears to me you are a classic example of something I've said for over 30 years on radio and television. Whatever God saves you from, brings you through, he turns you around and makes you a minister too. So
correct.
That you're a living example of that.
Exactly.
But does that trauma ever go away? Do you ever wake up in the middle of the night with a cold sweat and remembering it?
Not anymore. And this is the reason why I want to do this show, because I really strongly believe that trauma can be resolved. Okay, you can get to a place. The way I like to put it is, Perry, if I cut my arm today, and then you took your finger and poked my wound, would I react? Well, absolutely. Mm-hmm. Let's say I waited 3 weeks and now there's a scab. You poke the wound. Do I react? Yeah, but not as much. It's got some healing. Let's say I wait 3 months and now there's a scar, and you poke the wound. Do I react? Probably not. In fact, the skin where I was cut, that scar, that skin is stronger than the skin that was there before. So God making a point there.
That is a good analogy.
So here's the deal. Let's take that cutting and let's apply it to your soul, to your heart. So that's where most of the trauma is at, is in your soul, your emotions. So somebody cuts you and cuts you and cuts you over time, right? Or you have 1 or 2 cuts that are big. So you're walking through your life, minding your own business, day in and day out, driving down the road, and boom, a thought enters your mind. You didn't ask for it. You didn't ask to remember some traumatic event, and there it is. And now, you know, you have the reaction. And I tell this story all the time. When I was in my mid-20s, when I was a kid, I spent a lot of time in the bar. I spent a lot of time sitting in a bar waiting for my dad while he got drunk, and then he would drive me home, and then usually I'd get in some sort of physical, I'd get beat or something. So I didn't really like being in there. I mean, I don't know very many kids that like sitting in bars where people are getting loaded. But so I would sit in the bar, and then he'd go home and bad things would happen. So one day, I'm like in my mid-20s, I'm walking down the street, and I walk by a bar. And you know the bar smell?
Yeah.
That stale bar smell?
Yeah.
That smell hit me, and it was like, all of a sudden, I was ready to beat the next person I saw down. I just was like furious. And I'm a Christian at the time, and I was like, wow, that was kind of weird. Why was that? And that God started to reveal to me that was the connection to the trauma that I had. And this is what we call in trauma therapy, this is what we call a trigger. You can be triggered by many things in terms of your trauma. It can be a smell. Many people who have a lot of sexual trauma, they can remember the smell of the room. They can remember, you know, exceedingly clear details about the event, because that trauma bypasses a lot of your filters and particularly when you're young. So if you have these open wounds, stuff's going to poke them. And so how that looks different with different people. Some people might isolate, some people might become promiscuous, some people might use substance, some people might work harder. There's 1,000 ways you can do it. And there are a lot of people who are highly traumatized who are also highly successful. And one of the reasons why is because they do have ironclad compartmentalizing skills.
That's good and bad.
It has a very good side, because I can be in a meeting and shut everything out and be completely focused, right? But is that
easier for men than women?
Well, I know a lot of women that have this skill because of their trauma, and they're very successful people, but doesn't mean they're not really hurt. So here's the problem. If you don't deal with the trauma and you continue to be able to disassociate, compartmentalize like that, no intimate relationship you have will be of much value.
All right. Most people that have been traumatized, and this is, I guess, a rhetorical question, and maybe say it's 25, 30 years ago.
Right.
Do they actually get to the point where they forget what happened, or is it always there? They know something happened in their life, and it could be the cause of their discomfort today.
It's a little bit of both. I'm frankly thankful that I can't remember everything that happened to me.
All right.
If God, I'm a strong believer, Perry, that God knows what needs to come to the surface.
Okay.
I'm not really a big believer in this, you know,
digging it out, real
digging
deep.
it out. No, because look, I don't know what the person can handle. They don't know what they can handle. We think we do, but that's ultimately, I believe, God's territory. And so in much of the work I've done, I have people start to write stuff that's already on the surface. So somebody who's traumatized, for example, you might have trouble sleeping. And what reason you have trouble sleeping is because at night your mind is on fire, just running scenarios, whatabouts and how comes, or you're remembering things or whatever. So I say, whatever's knocking at the door, that's where you start. And then God in His mercy will lead you back through whatever you need to go through. And I don't believe every rock needs to be overturned.
Amen. And I'm not a counselor. Let us take a break. If you want to join us, you can. And if you want to remain anonymous, we'll respect that. The phone number is 541-776-5368. Or out of the area, it's 1-800-373-5368. And we'll let you talk to Patrick. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Paulina, and I work at theDove TV. Did you know that when you support theDove TV, you have a profound impact, not only in our community, but around the world? It's your continued support that takes the inspiration and hope in the programs we produce and makes them available to the thousands of people who are watching these videos online every week. Help bring encouragement and hope to our valley and beyond by making a secure online donation today at our website, thedove.us.
We're back, and we're dealing with a subject that is really deep in the heart of a lot of people, and that's dealing with the subject of trauma. And the question you may want to ask yourself deep down in your soul, if you're listening and watching this privately, have you been traumatized? There's a good chance they know that they have.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
Most people do.
Most people do. Even though you may have disconnected it or you have compartmentalized it.
Yeah.
The effects of it and the remembrance of it is still there, and the effects of it now may be showing up later on in life. Mm-hmm. And I don't mean to get really weird here, but I've done enough shows with health issues to know that when women go through the change, it really pops up.
Right. Well, here,
and so those things are quite.
There's some research that coincides with that, and some research that I've found to be real helpful, which is they did a bunch of research on people who have been traumatized. Mm-hmm. And what they discovered is that women who have experienced childhood trauma between the ages of their early 30s and their early 40s do what they start to break down. In other words, what they've used to contain the trauma starts to break down, so they start to have more symptoms of trauma. So women are between early 30s and early 40s. Men are between early 40s and early 50s.
Wow.
And it's amazing to see how accurate that is. And some people, of course, go longer. Some people go earlier. It's not a foolproof thing. But the truth is, what it brings to the surface, Perry, is that you cannot contain this forever.
Right. Sooner or later, you're going to have to deal with it.
And I always say this: you deal with it, or it'll deal with you.
Okay. Let me say to our viewers and listeners, if you want to join the conversation, 776-5368, that's area code 541-776-5368. And if you're watching on Roku somewhere out there and the other 8 states out there, 1-800-373-5368. All right. Let's do some basics. What are signs of people who've been traumatized?
Well, there's lots of signs. I wish I had an exhaustive list, but because each person's trauma is different. So if somebody's sexually assaulted or sexually traumatized, it'll have a certain look. If somebody's emotionally traumatized, they've been so, like, somebody could have like a critical parent who just runs them down, and the parent thinks they're doing the right thing by, making them strong or whatever. Somebody else could be sexually traumatized. So I get concerned about trying to help people understand that, but here's one thing I can tell you, that somebody who's been traumatized doesn't have peace.
So that's an overruling one.
That's an overruling thing.
Is there anger involved?
Yes, there's usually anger involved, but it's usually seen more. What I see more often than anything is that it's turned inward.
So people become extremely cynical.
They become self-destructive, cynical, isolated. They don't want to do relationships on a deep level. And sometimes with sexual trauma, people become promiscuous, but there's not intimacy.
Okay.
Because the truth is, when I feel like, here's the main thing that happens, Perry, and this is the thing I want to get people to understand, is that, look, every time you're traumatized, there's a message associated with the trauma. And the message associated with the trauma is that you're not good enough. You're defective. There's something wrong with you.
So they suffer a low self-esteem?
Yep, they don't have the appropriate level of value for themselves. So listen, if somebody believes they're worthless and no good and a piece of junk, how might they treat themselves?
Well, poorly.
Yeah. So there's one of your signs. So listen, every abuser uses some sort of control or scare tactic or threat or actual violence or harm to control their victim. And when they do that, not only that, but then the harm they do, both those things send a very convincing message that you're not good enough. Now listen, if we believe we're not good enough, then we're gonna have weak will to change, right? And hey, guess what? In my opinion, from a spiritual point of view, the scripture says that Satan is the father of lies and the accuser of the brethren. So the wagging finger in your head is not God. That's Satan. So he'll take these events and stand on them and look at you and say, in your mind, and I hear a lot of people say this, the wagging finger in their mind is what keeps them stuck. What about, and you know, and you can't, and you're not good enough, and what happened, look what you did. And 9 times out of 10, abuse victims blame themselves for the abuse. So
it eventually evolves into low self-esteem and low self-respect.
Self-destructive behavior.
What about controlling? Or criticism or critical spirit?
Absolutely, because that's self-destructive. But you know, a lot of times if I've been wounded, I've become very defensive, and I'm not going to give anybody even the slightest chance of ever hurting me again. So I can be very defended and very walled off. It can go 1,000 ways, but here's the other thing I want to say is that, listen, if you look at what God is saying based on His demonstrated behavior toward us, He's not saying you're worthless. He's saying, honey, I'll take care of you. And I tell you, for me, in my experience of recovering from my trauma, it was God really etching the truth of what He feels about me onto my heart. And I know that might sound weird to some folks, but listen, I can't explain it, but I know that He loves me. And that was the thing that gave me courage to start to face my trauma. And I believe until you have a solid foundation, you're in danger. If you start facing that trauma, it's going to get really squirrely because you don't have the foundation to deal with the difficulty or the pain or whatever. So I want people to be very careful that the first thing I help people do is I want to make sure there's a solid foundation before we start cracking that box of trauma open.
Okay, I wanted to come to that, but let me take a phone call because I think that's the key. So you want to make sure, just to highlight that quickly, you want to make sure that the relationship between the victim and God is first taken care of before you ever go back in and deal. Okay, I think that
because a lot of people think they think the trauma is God punishing them or saying to them how He really feels.
Okay. That is huge. All right, let's go to the phones. Hi, Marianne. What's your question today?
I have a comment first. You're totally correct about having the trauma when you're growing up and having, issues with promiscuous. My trauma was, there was 9 of us kids, and I was the oldest, and I had, the sexual trauma and the other trauma, and all of us went through it, but I was the one that remembered it. My brothers and sisters don't remember it. They just totally blocked it from themselves. And until I was 30, I just kind of held it in, but went through all this garbage in my life, and I wasn't a Christian at the time. So at 30, I just freaked and totally went bonkers, and they discovered I was bipolar, put me on medication. I became a Christian when I was 40, and God just kind of really has worked in my life and really got me out of it and brought me through it. The problem is that my question is, I guess, is now my family wants me to write the stories of our history, and I don't want to.
Why do they want you to do that?
Well, they don't remember this stuff growing up. I mean, things like my mom hitchhiked with us from Fort Worth, Texas to L.A., California, with 6 of us. And I was the oldest, and I was like just before I turned 14. And we hitchhiked all the way. And they don't remember doing that stuff. And they don't remember her putting us in a shed and setting the shed on fire. They don't remember that stuff, but they want me to write these things down so that they can have like a history of our life. And I don't want to, because it's like bringing
wow, that's a big question.
So Marianne, I would say this, if it's my belief that you don't get real healing from the trauma until the whole story is told. Because when you hold it in, it leaves room for you to have doubt, and it leaves room for you to feel like you're worthless, and really, am I crazy? Did this really happen? Did it really not happen? And so you got to get with somebody who's good with trauma, and you got to start telling the story and actually writing it out. I really encourage people that I work with to write this story out. But let me offer this caution. Only if you're ready, only if you feel like the sturdiness in you to start to take this on. Otherwise, what happens is you get triggered, and then you start to have all those unhealthy behaviors that you experienced in your 30s.
That's true. That is my fear, and that is my.
Right.
I know that when I start thinking about it or telling the story with my family,
right.
My thinking starts getting all kabobbled up, and the feelings of bad things come back.
Marianne, you have a lot of the trauma that's still unhealed. So I really suggest that you find somebody that you can work with, that you feel comfortable with, and I would check out some people because listen, if you don't feel comfortable, you can't tell this very difficult story. So it's really important that you feel comfortable. And the other thing is that it's going to take time. This is not going to be a quick process. And a lot of us, when we're in a lot of pain and difficulty, we want things to heal immediately. We're tired of dealing with it. But just let me tell you something, the process is worth it, because on the other side is peace. There's resolution from the things that have been chasing you. And I think your story is a very common one with people who in the family who have varying levels of denial. And that is a whole nother complication to the trauma, because you can't necessarily trust your own memory.
Can I ask one question here for Mary Ann's benefit?
Okay.
Are you suggesting that she write it out for herself, not necessarily to give to the family?
Well, I'm saying as a part of her dealing with the trauma, she needs to write it out, what she remembers, with someone helping her through it, so that they can help her see the realities, instead of it all being dependent on her own internal understanding.
But the motivation is for her own healing, not necessarily to give the story to the family.
And after that's done, if you get the healing and you feel the peace that comes from that, then I would go to my family and say, well, here's the story as I see it.
Well, the other issue is that in the last, we lost two of our kids 5.5 years ago. I'm having to heal from that.
There you go.
And we lost our granddaughter in several years ago, and I'm having to heal from that.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't even want to deal with that far back.
And I really strongly believe, Marianne, that if when it's time, God will bring conviction to you, and you won't be able to not go there.
Oh, so I can heal from everything else first, right?
Yes. Well, you need to. I don't think that, again, the fact that you're hedging on it tells me you're not ready.
Oh, good. Okay.
And that's fine. You'll get there. But you have to take it slow. And that's one of the problems I have with a lot of the stuff that we do in counseling, is we push people a little too fast because we want to help. But I've learned over the years that people need to have their own timing on that. And the other thing is that being traumatized, one of the things that happens is you lose control. And so if somebody wants to deal with their trauma, it's really important that they have a sense of control, that you don't feel pushed by somebody or something to do this, because that's another kind of trauma.
Well said. Thanks, Marianne.
Thank you.
You bet.
Bless you. Bye-bye.
You too. All right. Well, you can tell very deep stuff here. We're going to take a quick break. We're dealing with trauma. If you want to join us, 541-776-5368, or outside the immediate area, toll free at 1-800-373-5368. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Daniel, and I work at theDove TV. Compared to Portland, Seattle, and LA, Medford might be considered a small market, but at theDove, we're excited about the opportunity to make a big impact right here in our community. And you help make that happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us now by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or by phoning 541-776-5368.
Well, huge topic today. We're dealing with trauma, and maybe you have been traumatized in your life at various levels, and it could be emotional, physical, sexual, all kinds of ways, and big topic. Let me go to these phone calls because I have a ton of questions, but I want to get our listeners in. Hi, Don. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind today?
I really resonated with your last caller. I'm a traumatized person, and I could hear the pain in her voice in the background. She's trying to hold it down, but I could hear it, and I just knew it because that's where I live. But anyway, one of the things when she talked about reliving and writing, in going back to that place, there's always the fear, like she said, that you're going to go back into that negative pattern.
Yeah.
But there's Focus on the Family had this couple on, Milan and Kay Yurkovich, and they wrote a book, and they were explaining some of the things in their book. So I bought the book, and I want to tell you, in that book, there's a promise that you can get to that place and be comforted, and it's called a comfort circle. And I don't know if there's any counselors in the area that do that, but it'd be really cool to hear some of them on the radio. Right. But anyway, as a traumatized person, when I read that book, I got that little ray of sunshine of hope that, there is a chance that those places could be gone to, and there could be healing there.
That's true. I strongly believe that, Don, that healing is possible. And, I feel like I'm living proof of it, that God is capable to bring you out of that trauma and use it to your benefit. While I'll never forget many of the things that happened to me, God, on a regular basis, uses those experiences to help me help others. And that's the result of the healing. It's not the result of me being a good guy. It's just God's mercy healing what was meant for evil.
Interesting. Thanks, Don.
Oh, you're welcome.
Okay, let me ask you this before we go to the next caller. Do you think it's possible to get totally healed of trauma without God?
No.
Okay. So He is the answer.
Well, I think that God is the only one with the power necessary to bring comfort and healing to things at such a deep level. The Holy Spirit, my opinion, is what is the comforter, right? It's what Jesus said, I'm sending you the comforter. So I don't think it's possible to get to that. Can you get better? Can you make improvement? Can you live less bothered by the trauma without a spiritual reality? Yes. Can you get to the place of what I would call real healing? I don't think so.
The reason I ask that question, and I know that there are Christians who suffer trauma who are trying to handle it any other way but going to God. I don't think, well, why aren't you going to the source of everything?
Right.
Why are you trying to handle this outside of God?
And the truth is, God's going to need some people, He's going to need some of His God with skin on people, to help. And this is part of what, is important about we as a church, is that we have to start being willing to go here. And like Don was talking about, having people around you who aren't going to judge you, who aren't going to, spiritualize, who aren't going to, pat you on the head and send you away, that are going to really get involved in, like the scripture says, bear one another's burdens.
Okay. Let's go to the phones. Hi, Ellen. Thanks for waiting. What's on your mind?
Well, this is just kind of a general question. We hear a lot about PTSD, especially when it relates to, people coming from the military and their military experience.
Yep, those guys got it.
Are there differences between the dynamics of trauma from that source as compared to what you've been discussing? I'll take the answer off here.
All right, thanks, Alan.
It's a great question. So I believe there are some nuances, because when it's your mom or dad or your brother, physically or sexually abusing you, that's hit you in a different place than going to war. But going to war, and I've talked to many of the guys that have come back from Iraq and Afghanistan, they are traumatized. The level of stress that they're under on a daily basis, the number of things they see on a regular basis that are, horrific, it affects them. And so if they don't deal with the trauma, it will deal with them. And we're seeing that in the military population. A lot of guys killing themselves because they just can't get the stuff out of their head. They can't get away from it. And so I think there is somewhat of a difference, but the healing process is relatively the same. I believe that you're going to need a strong spiritual life to get to the other side of that kind of trauma. And even though you did it in the military and you were doing what you were told and you were, basically being, responsible and maybe even heroic, does it change the fact that it's very damaging to see those things?
Well, trauma war is in a category all by itself.
Yeah, well, and it's very intense. It's funny because I've talked to a lot of guys that have come back from it, and they sit in my office and their marriage is on the rocks, or they're anxious, or they have a lot of the symptoms of trauma, and they'll say, well, yeah, but I don't have PTSD. I'm fine. I don't really. It's not a problem. Well, why would somebody say that when they've obviously been through traumatic events? Because they don't want to face it. I've been trying to avoid it all along. That was my coping skill, is just to act like it didn't happen. The problem is, you can do that, but it will not lead you to having a peaceful, healthy, relationally healthy life. You cannot avoid that stuff and expect that it's going to just be okay.
I back to Christians who just can't somehow accept what you accepted to get through yours. I mean, somewhere in there's a supernatural thing that happens.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't think you can't define it in a book. It's God. It's divine intervention.
It is,
and they have to seek that. They have to seek it,
and it's been continual. That's the other thing I want to say, is that divine intervention wasn't once many years ago. It's on a regular basis.
Right.
Even to this day, the kind of effect that I have from my trauma to today would be an instant level of doubt. So my dad told me I was a worthless piece of junk and I never amount to anything, bang, bang, bang. Okay, so that's a pretty strong message.
Yeah, right.
So it's taken God a while to help me see that's not true. But, I often, the first thing that comes to me is, well, you're not, what about, and you could have, and you didn't, and how come? It's that undermining, that undertow, and a lot of people with trauma know what I'm talking about. And that's gotten better, where years ago it would take me days or weeks or months to recover. Now it's minutes. But, the liar, the enemy of our souls doesn't take a day off.
How did you overcome the self-esteem issue, that you weren't, if you were pounded in your head, you're nothing.
Yeah.
And you're just a piece of junk. How did you replace value back into your life?
Well, and that's the thing that I think people misunderstand. It's not an event. It's a process. But there were several events that I regularly remember that really keep me in the truth. Because here's the deal. If somebody says, hey, I love you and you have value, yeah, whatever. I can deny that, undo that in a nanosecond, okay? But when God does what I call, He etches, He writes something into your heart. And there's experiences that I've had where I know that He did that. I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know it was going to happen. In one case, I was basically in a complete conniption fit, complaining, which I encourage. And He spoke to me in a way that I cannot deny. And that is one of the things that I go back to, is that I know that He does indeed love me. And He was there. He knows about my trauma. He wasn't not present.
You ever get mad at Him because He didn't stop it?
Absolutely. That was one of the most pivotal times in my life. Is I was basically having a full-blown screaming match. Well, it wasn't a match. It was just me screaming at God. He wasn't screaming back.
Yeah, right.
And I had one particular memory in my mind of my dad. What was probably the worst beating I took. And I could tell by my dad's eyes, by the look in his eyes, kind of how bad it was going to be. I could just tell. And so in this particular case, I had never seen this look before. And so I was pretty concerned that, this could be the last time this happens. He could kill me. You just don't know what's going to happen. So I was having this, screaming fest with God, and I was, if you love me, where were you? How come you didn't stop him? What about, and how come? And I was just expletives, and it's just flying out of me. And God, and I didn't hear any voices, and I didn't see any skywriting, but I know that God spoke to me. And He said, son, who do you think stopped him? And I was like, what? I had never considered that. And then in my mind, it was like dominoes, just going. I started having all these memories of my dad where he would stop just unexplained. He'd just stop hitting me. And God was like, son, I was there. I'm the one who stopped him. Now, later, as the story goes on, I was like, well, why didn't you just prevent it? And God's like, well, your dad was evil. I wasn't going to let him go any farther than I was going to let him. But I didn't want your dad to be evil. That was something that was going on in him. But I'm here for you, and I'm taking care of you, and I protected you. Not the way you wanted, but I'm guaranteeing you I'm not going to leave. Well, that was so healing to me, because I thought that my dad was right. I thought that the reason why I was abused is because nobody gave a care. And what God said was, no, I was there. I was the one inside your head listening to you scream. I was there. I'm not unaware. I am going to take this and I'm going to redeem it. Now, would I have written the story differently?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Absolutely.
You would. Yeah.
But I can tell you, Perry, that every day of my life, the difficulties that I have experienced are beneficial to people that I talk to.
All right, we're going to take a break here, but when we come back, and let me just say to viewers and listeners, if you have young kids in the room, you may want to move them elsewhere, because I'm going to ask you about sexual abuse.
Okay, good.
Because I have become extremely alarmed of how rampant it is within the family.
Yep.
And so you may want to scoot the young kids out a little bit. We'll be right back with Patrick Doyle.
Hi, I'm Paula, and I work at theDove TV. Every day we get letters and emails from people who've been encouraged, blessed, and challenged by the programs on theDove TV. But we couldn't do it without you. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to bring inspiration and hope to our community by making a secure online donation at our website, thedove.us, or call us at 541-776-5368.
Okay, we're back with Patrick Doyle, and we're dealing with the subject of trauma again. This last segment, I want to deal with an area that can be very sensitive and somewhat adult in content. And I would encourage you, if you have young people, you may want to scoot them off into the room, because I want to deal with the subject of sexual traumatizing. It happens a lot, and I've heard stories through the years, and you probably heard a whole lot more than I have. But I am shocked. I quite frankly don't know how to deal with it. Where the abuse has been within the family.
Yeah.
Could be a father, could be an uncle, could be a brother, could be a grandfather, and these issues, and I'm thinking, and finally when a woman decides to deal with it, it's another trauma is created because the family now gets blown up in the middle of all of this, so to speak. A husband knew nothing about it, now he has to, So I mean, is this common?
Yeah. Well, I've often said that if it weren't for sexual trauma, I'd probably have to get another job.
Really?
Because not only is it dealing with the current cases of sexual trauma, but I deal with a lot of people who are traumatized from being in families where there was sexual trauma, or their dad or mom was messed up. They didn't mess them up, but they were messed up from their sexual trauma, which, it's been going on for centuries. It's a very real reality, and I want us as a body of believers, as a church, I want us to be way more aware and open to this thing rather than acting like it doesn't exist. And I can tell you so many times in my experience, Perry, the people, there have been many people within the church who have positions of power and authority that use that as a way to abuse people.
All right, so you have it in the church, but you also have it in the home, in the family.
Absolutely. Well, and sometimes it's both. But so the reason I say that is that don't believe that because someone holds a position, they're not capable. Because, I can tell you 100 stories of that's not true.
Because if part of my mind, here's what I don't get, and I've been doing lay counseling for too many years. I just can't imagine what goes on in a Christian's mind that they're able to separate their so-called Christian values and get involved in this area and then live as if these two worlds never touch each other.
Right.
There's a part of the brain I don't get there.
Well, I have come to a certain belief about that, and it's this, that Jesus said, I'm sending you the Spirit for two reasons: to convict you of sin to let you know what's right, what's wrong, and to confirm the truth for you. And the other is to comfort you. Mm-hmm. So when someone tells me they're a believer, the first two things I want to see is conviction and comfort. So if someone is participating in those kind of behaviors without conviction, I'm concerned they don't have the Spirit, even though they have a Christian persona.
Well, they can believe, but they're not filled with the Spirit.
If you don't have the Spirit, then you're not going to obey God, because in that conviction is what keeps us from destroying ourselves, right? So one of the things that I think is hard for people in the church to believe is that exists. I mean, I can't tell you how many elders and pastors and leaders that I've dealt with who are absolutely duplicitous, living two lives. It's very real. It happens all the time. It's happening today. It'll happen tomorrow. It happened yesterday. So, but in terms of sexual trauma in a family, that is very damaging because of the relational, so if it's a father to a daughter, I mean, so what is a daughter to believe at 6 or 8 or 14 or 10 when her father or her brother sexually assaults her? Do they think, oh, it's, their fault? No, generally the person who does the abusing tells them it's their fault, or they threaten them if they tell this will happen or that'll happen. And so the person gets stuck, stranded, and then the abuse becomes repeated. And then the person that's being traumatized believes that it's their fault, that they're the reason why it happened, and they can't tell. And that's why they hold on to it, because they've been threatened. And, very rarely in families do I see abuse starting in the teens. Usually it starts a little younger, so that there's that stronger control. And, let's face it, sexual trauma is probably the most damaging because of the violation level that happens.
All right. Can somebody recover?
Absolutely. Many people have. Many people are. It's very real. Recovery is very possible, but you cannot recover and stay in denial.
Okay, so you have to deal with it.
You have to confront it, which means you may have to confront the abuser. That's a process, and I'm just going to say this out loud again. You can't do this on your own. You got to get somebody who can help you, who's willing to go to bat, who's willing to walk with you, who is not going to just be, oh, okay, tell me the story and then move on. This is a process that takes some people this long, some people that long. There's no standard.
What is your obligation as a counselor to stop it if it's ongoing? That's one of my. I definitely want to get in there and stop it, because listen, confronting the abuser is loving to them. I'm hoping they'll repent. Have you seen abusers repent?
I've seen a handful.
A handful.
But it is definitely the lower percentage of things, because the level of
is the conviction so much so on the abuser, they know it's so wrong that they'll deny it and lie about it because they know it's so low?
I think most people who get to that point have so blackened their heart that not much penetrates it.
Amazing. Let's go to the phone. Hi, ma'am. You're on the air with Patrick Doyle. What's your thought today? Go ahead.
Am I on the air?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I just wondered if I could get the name of that book the man said was the help. We took a foster child. We got her at 8 years old, and we raised her Christian, sent her to Christian school and everything. She was sexually abused in her earlier years, and she's in her 30s now, and she just can't get over it.
Did you get the name of the book?
I did.
I didn't get it. If the person if you can call back and give us the name of the book, and then you call back, we'll try to connect you two together, okay?
Okay, because there's no help available once a person is an adult. When she was a teenager, we tried to get her help when we could afford it, and now we can't. And I just thought, I wonder if there's something such as a support group would be helpful.
Yeah, there's support groups. In fact, one of the things that I like about Celebrate Recovery is that this is one of the other issues that they will address. And I'm not so familiar with the specifically the groups in our area, but there are support groups for sexual trauma, but that's only one phase of it. And the other side of it is that people have to get with somebody who knows what they're doing as it relates to trauma. The support group is very helpful, but without somebody who's walking you through it, I think it's a really difficult reality.
Yeah,
and there's lots of, there's actually several good books out there. Healing for Damaged Emotions, that's a good one. I'm blanking on the others, but I have a list of books that I think will be helpful, but I'm always leery of give them out because I don't want somebody reading the book without being connected to somebody who can help them. Last thing you want is get all that stuff stirred up and have nowhere to go.
Yeah, interesting.
Well,
thank you.
Believe me, I prayed for her.
Thank you.
My husband and I both. Okay, thank you.
The next question is a tough one, and I'm not asking you to be critical, just being honest.
Okay.
Is it true that most churches won't touch this because they just don't know what to do? And pastors will say, well, I'll pray for you. The bottom line is if they come to their spiritual leader on this issue, all right, I will admit I'm not trained.
Right.
But at the same time, I can't let them fall through the cracks.
Yeah. Well, but part of my concern, Perry, and this is something I've thought of for a long time, was that as a church, why do we think we shouldn't deal with this? Why are we turning this over to somebody else? Yeah. Why aren't we training ourselves? Why aren't we getting ready? Yeah. Because it's happening in droves within our congregation.
Absolutely.
We need to quit putting our head in the sand and saying, well, I don't know, it's too much. Because listen, it is a lot. And I've spent many hours of my life helping people pick the pieces up and helping them find the pieces. Okay? But that's where it requires. This can't be a service thing. This has got to be individual. You got to bear that person's burden. You got to be willing to go there. Listen, nobody's disqualified in terms of having the ability to bear another's burden. We can all do it.
Right.
And there's some very minimal training that can happen that can make you a very helpful person.
But there's a key point to this. If they come to a spiritual leader for help and they don't get it, we put gas on the fire.
Well, I think we've missed an opportunity at a minimum.
Yeah.
And the alternative therapies, from my point of view, are medication, which is not going to heal the problem. It's going to mask it, but medication is not going to heal your trauma. That's going to be the process of you confronting what happened to you. Listen, the other part of the healing of trauma for me was forgiveness. I have to forgive my dad. You got to forgive the abuser. When you're like, I'm not going to forgive him, I understand, but like we've said a million times, Perry, resentment is when I take the poison and wait for the other guy to die. When I'm resenting my abuser, the only thing I'm doing is giving him more power to hurt me. So going through that process of forgiveness is a key component to getting well. But by no means is forgiving the abuser saying what they did is okay, because it is not, and it never will be okay to treat somebody like that.
Can the abused ever be intimate again?
Absolutely. In fact, I think sometimes I've seen some cases where the redemption of the person is so significant that they have profoundly good intimacy. And it's usually the case when, here's the other thing, men, if your wife is abused, you got to walk through this with her. You can't say that she's sick or too sensitive. If you do that, you're now an abuser as far as I'm concerned, by abandoning this person who's been traumatized, who you say you love.
Well said.
But it's not easy. Trust me, it's not easy. And I have some friends who have walked through years of difficulty with their wives, and that produces something redemptive that you cannot calculate.
Yeah. Well,
it's
Patrick,
a lot like Jesus.
This is an overwhelming topic. We'll have to pick it up again.
Yeah.
Maybe attached to this is the subject of fear.
Yeah.
Maybe we can deal with some of that.
Yeah.
Your office number?
622-6018, or you can check us out on the web at veritascounseling.com.
Okay. All right. Well, let's pick this up again. And 622-6018 or veritascounseling.com. All right. We'll see you next time on Focus Today.
Hi, I'm Jim and I work at theDove TV. Every weekday between 6 and 8 a.m., our award-winning news and sports team bring you the best morning show around. It's live, it's honest, and it's a whole lot of fun. and you help make it happen. Did you know that more than 90% of our income comes from people like you? You can help us continue to air local programs that share your voice by making a secure online donation at our website, theDove.us.